And we will be live streaming now. All right, I wanted to catch up on a few points that we couldn't do last week because the system wasn't quite running properly, and I needed to make sure that everything is running properly for tonight. So we're dealing with the book Crossing the Lines That We Draw. A way to connect with other people in a divided world. And we left off with the idea that a truly civilized world is one that is marked by inclusiveness, love, joy, peace, patience, and self-control. The fruit of the Spirit, basically. And so, how do we talk to each other when we have different and disparate beliefs, when things just don't seem to be going our way? No, okay, that didn't work. Error. Okay, this is what I need to see. I need to take a quick picture here because I'm getting an error message and I need to track down why we've got this condition. Okay, so what I'm going to, please use a frame rate frequency of 4 seconds or less. Okay. All right, so anyway, how do you converse with somebody who has a divergent set of views, who's been consuming channels that you don't, and getting information that's very different from your own? Well, you start by going into any conversation you have with the idea that your position, that their position might be right and yours might be wrong, and that you can be convinced of a different perspective. We need to ask ourselves, how would we look at the world through this other person's point of view? And as we work on that, we hope to create some empathy for that individual, give them some grace. Not just assume that they're wrong or that they're an opponent, but take the time to listen to them, to explore difficult questions with them. And we need to cultivate the ability to listen to each other not to try to gainsay one another, not to argue with each other, but to actually hear the other person's point of view. And there are ways to do this. There are listening strategies that we can employ. We can listen to learn. Too often in group discussions, we wait impatiently for our turn, especially when the current speaker is presenting a point of view that we disagree with. We want to leap right in. We have to resist the urge to interrupt that person. But we need to be truly listening to their words. Instead, how can we learn from one another if we don't learn to hear one another? We can't. We really need to take the time to actually settle back and listen to the other person. There are some basic strategies that we can employ. For instance, we need to be aware of and minimize our nonverbal responses, especially the negative ones like crossing our arms, frowning, shaking our heads, pointing our fingers, because that communicates just as loudly as words that we don't agree with somebody, that we're hostile to their point of view. We need to notice when one or two people are dominating a conversation, including ourselves. We need to practice listening without replying. We need to establish a time limit for individuals who, for how long they can speak. Alternatively, or additionally, we need to agree on a limited number of turns for each person, which will encourage people who are shyer to speak up, to take their turn, and that when we are speaking, we'll be speaking with greater intentionality to get our point across. Sometimes you can use a talking stick to minimize crosstalk. The person who has the stick is the only person who can be speaking. And to give each participant a turn to speak or to pass in the discussion rotation. We can create a space In other words, we can be silent, which you don't want to do on something like this, but when you're face to face, you can take the time to be silent, to allow the more introverted and introspective participants time to respond. Because a lot of times, the introspective person has a great depth of knowledge that they can provide if we're quiet enough to give them the time and the encouragement to say something. We can slow the pace of the discussion by establishing a 5-second pause between speakers. This lowers the heat in the room. This makes sure people aren't talking over one another, like you see on a lot of popular shows. We need to avoid misunderstandings by reflecting back what you've heard, saying things like, "I heard you saying," or "Does this accurately reflect your meaning?" We need to ask clarifying questions. Can you say more about why you feel that way? We need to recognize that the intent is not to have a negative impact on others. We need to take responsibility, in fact, for the impact of our own words, even if that impact is unintended. Saying, "I did not mean that, what you heard. I'm very sorry that I appeared to be making such a comment. That wasn't my intention." Also, you can say, "Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I did not understand that." We need to avoid all or nothing terms such as always, never, everyone or no one, all or none, everywhere and nowhere, because any sentence that begins that way, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, are not true. Well, everyone knows that. Nobody believes that. Everywhere you go, people are saying, none of those things are true. Instead, we can use I language. We speak for ourselves and we reference our own experience. It has been my experience that such and such happens in this place. And we resist any temptation for accusation or for blame. We don't get involved in childish name calling. We don't smear other people. None of that. So, that's a few of the things that we can do to help have a more constructive conversation. We didn't have time for that last week. And before we meet, or before next week's session, what we can do is read or watch the news from a different perspective. Try to see what someone with a different point of view is actually consuming as news, so we have a better understanding of their position. Because what we're trying to do is humanize people who hold opposite points of view, to see them as Christ sees them, as human beings that are loved by God. And this is an exercise that you can revisit periodically, and it is deeply informative. And it's very interesting to see what other people are thinking. All right, that's all for now. We'll get back together tonight. This is November 9th. We'll get together at 8 p.m. for another half-hour session. This will be session 3 about being new beings in Christ, and developing trust as a reconciling act. It'll be exciting. I look forward to seeing you there. So long for now. See you tonight.